I used to enjoy going grocery shopping by myself. Sometimes I would stay a little longer because it felt like a small break from the routines waiting at home. Now it feels different. Whenever I push my cart into the supermarket, I notice a quiet heaviness settling in my chest. It wasn't because we had run out of money, and we weren't facing a crisis either. Still, something else had quietly changed. I began noticing price tags before the products themselves. I found myself calculating before choosing and worrying before shopping even started. My name is Clara. I never imagined that something as simple as buying groceries could leave me feeling this anxious. That morning, I sat at the dining table with several tabs already open. My laptop, our bank balance, and the grocery lists were all in front of me. Our income hadn't changed much over time. Still, the expenses somehow felt different lately. I wrote down eggs, then milk, then bread. A few other things quietly disappeared from the list. There wasn't any big decision to make. It was simply a collection of many small choices. Myra was having breakfast while Armin was getting ready for work. From the outside, everything looked normal. But in my mind, the calculations had already started before I even left the house. They seemed to begin long before the shopping itself. And somehow, this had become part of almost every week. I barely noticed when it started happening so often. As soon as I walked into the supermarket, I headed straight to the fruit section. It had become part of my usual routine without much thought. I picked up a box of strawberries and checked the price. Then I paused for a moment. I was pretty sure it'd cost less just a few months ago. The thought stayed with me longer than I expected. Then I checked the milk, the eggs, and the cereal. One item after another caught my attention. Everything seemed a little more expensive. Nothing was shocking, but it was enough to notice. I started noticing something I hadn't thought about before. I wasn't simply shopping anymore. It felt like I was negotiating with the budget, with priorities, and even with myself. Those thoughts quietly followed me as I stood there. I stood in the cereal aisle and paused for a moment. My eyes settled on the boxes lined up in front of me. Something about the boxes felt different. They seemed smaller, even though the prices were higher. After that, I started noticing similar things in other products. It was becoming harder to ignore. Smaller packages, less inside, and the prices still kept moving upward. I quietly laughed to myself for a second. Not because it was funny, but because I felt tired. I was beginning to understand that inflation does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly. And what wears me down the most is having to keep paying attention to it. That thought stayed with me as I stood there. By the evening, we were sitting together for dinner like we always do. It was one of those ordinary moments that usually made the day feel settled. Myra talked about school while Armin shared stories from work. I listened to both of them as the conversation moved naturally around the table. We laughed together, and the atmosphere felt warm and familiar. Nothing about the evening seemed unusual. Even so, my mind kept returning to the groceries from earlier that morning. Those thoughts stayed with me while the evening carried on. I was still thinking about the small choices I had to make. They seemed simple, but they stayed on my mind. I was already thinking about what might need to be cut back next week. Those questions stayed quietly in the background of my mind. Nothing was wrong in our home, yet I was beginning to feel tired from carrying all these thoughts by myself. The evening stayed peaceful, but my mind felt busy. The following weekend, we went grocery shopping together like we usually do. It felt like another ordinary family errand. Myra walked beside the cart and looked around at the different snacks. She seemed happy just browsing the shelves. Then she picked up a small box of her favorite biscuits. She held it carefully as if it were something special. "Mom, can we get this one?" she asked with a smile. Her voice sounded simple and cheerful. I didn't answer right away. Something inside me paused before I could say anything. In those few seconds, I had already gone through 5 other expenses in my mind. The numbers appeared faster than my response. That was when I realized something had changed. Even a simple question from my daughter now met financial anxiety before anything else. So that night, I sat alone in the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed. The quiet around me felt different than usual. I kept thinking about how I had reacted earlier. It wasn't really about the biscuits, but about the thoughts running through my mind. It suddenly occurred to me that I never seemed to stop calculating things. Even during quiet moments, my mind stayed busy. Bills, necessities, and possible problems all seemed to take turns filling my head. I felt like I was constantly keeping track of everything. Sitting there, a thought came to me that I hadn't noticed before. I stayed with it for a while in the silence. I realized that it wasn't only the rising prices that were tiring me. There was something heavier beneath that. What drained me most was knowing that I was always the one keeping everything in mind. Somehow, I had become the person responsible for thinking about it all. After Mira had fallen asleep, I sat with Armand in the quiet living room. Felt like the first calm moment we had shared all day. I wasn't bringing up budgets or monthly bills that night. Those numbers weren't what I wanted to talk about. What I finally spoke about was how tired I had been feeling. It had been sitting quietly inside me for a long time. "I'm not exhausted because of the money," I said quietly. The words came out more gently than I expected. "I'm tired because I'm always thinking about money," I admitted. Saying it out loud felt strangely unfamiliar. Armand stayed quiet for a while before giving a small nod. He didn't rush to say anything. For the first time, I felt that he truly understood what had been happening inside my mind every day. That quiet feeling stayed with me as we sat together. The following week, we decided to try something a little different. It wasn't a big change, just something we hadn't done before. Together, we started making a list of priorities for our family. For the first time, it felt like something we were doing side by side. It wasn't only about groceries anymore. We were making decisions, not just writing shopping items. We talked about what mattered, what could wait, and what didn't need to stay on our minds over and over again. Those conversations felt different from the ones we usually had. Little by little, something started to feel different. I noticed it quietly, without really thinking much about it. I wasn't carrying all of that mental weight by myself anymore. Somehow, it no longer felt like everything rested on me. The problems hadn't disappeared, but somehow they felt a little lighter than before. I've learned that inflation doesn't only affect the numbers in a bank account. Somehow, it reaches into everyday life in ways I never used to notice. It also seems to affect my peace of mind, my energy, and the space inside my head. Some days, even ordinary thoughts feel more crowded than before. Sometimes I feel like what I need most isn't more money. I just wish there were fewer decisions waiting for me every day. If this story feels familiar, I'd love for you to stay with Clara's family journal. This space has become a place where we take small steps toward a calmer family life. These days, I often wonder which part of grocery shopping creates the most stress. Is it the rising prices, planning for the family, or constantly doing the math in my head?